Let me tell you about a study that was published in 1967 in a prestigious nutrition journal. The study concluded, after thorough scientific review, that dietary fat and cholesterol were the primary drivers of heart disease in America. Sugar, the study argued, was largely irrelevant. The science was clear, the debate was settled, and for the next 5 decades, an entire generation of nutrition guidelines, food products, and public health campaigns were built on top of that conclusion. There was just one problem. The study was paid for by the Sugar Research Foundation. The scientists who wrote it received the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's money from the sugar industry, and the internal documents proving this didn't surface publicly until 2016, nearly 50 years later, buried in archives at the University of Illinois. By then, the damage was done. The low-fat dietary guidelines were already baked into a generation of food culture, and the sugar industry had spent 50 years selling you products while the science it purchased told you fat was the enemy. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented. It was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. It was covered by the New York Times. And it is one of the most important things you will never hear discussed at a nutrition conference, a government health briefing, or inside the lobby of any major food company. Because the story of how ultra-processed food became the dominant source of calories for the modern human diet is not a story about changing tastes or busy lifestyles or personal choice. It is a story about one of the most sophisticated and sustained campaigns of scientific manipulation in corporate history, and it is still happening right now. So let's talk about what ultra-processed food actually is. Because ultra-processed sounds like a made-up category invented by people who shop at farmers markets and own cast-iron pans. But it's not. It's a scientific classification system called NOVA, developed by researchers at the University of São Paulo, that categorizes food based on the degree and purpose of its industrial processing. Ultra-processed foods aren't just foods that have been cooked or preserved. They are industrial formulations made primarily from substances extracted or derived from foods, things like hydrogenated oils, modified starches, protein isolates, high fructose corn syrup, and then combined with additives that have no culinary equivalent. Artificial flavors, colors, emulsifiers, stabilizers, and preservatives, whose primary function is not to nourish you but to make the product last longer on a shelf, look more appealing under fluorescent lighting, and taste compelling enough that you reach for it again before you finish the last one. Think breakfast cereals, packaged snacks, instant noodles, soft drinks, flavored yogurts, most frozen meals, most fast food, most of what lines the middle aisles of every supermarket on Earth. Ultra-processed food now accounts for roughly 60% of the daily caloric intake of the average American. In the United Kingdom, it's about 57%. In Canada, 48%. In Brazil, which pioneered the NOVA classification system partly because researchers there watched the number climbing in real time, it's over 30% and rising fast. These are not fringe numbers. This is what the modern human diet actually looks like. And here is what the research says about what that diet is doing to the people eating it. A 2019 study published in the British Medical Journal followed over 100,000 adults and found that every 10% increase in the proportion of ultra-processed food in someone's diet was associated with a 12% increase in the risk of cancer overall and an 11% increase in breast cancer specifically. A study in JAMA Internal Medicine found associations between ultra-processed food consumption and higher risks of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and cerebrovascular disease. Research published in The Lancet found links to increased mortality from all causes. Studies on metabolic health, gut microbiome function, cognitive decline, depression, and obesity all point in the same direction. The more ultra-processed food in the diet, the worse the health outcomes. Across populations, across countries, across income levels. Now here is where it starts to sound familiar. Because when this research began accumulating, when the evidence linking ultra-processed food to chronic disease became difficult to ignore, the food industry did not respond by reformulating their products. They did not respond by reducing sugar, removing problematic additives, or funding independent research to better understand the mechanisms. They responded the way the tobacco industry responded when the evidence on cigarettes became too strong to deny. They funded their own science. They created their own research institutes with names that sound authoritative and neutral. They placed their scientists and lobbyists on government nutrition panels. They challenged the methodology of independent studies. They argued the evidence wasn't conclusive. They pivoted to personal responsibility, and they kept selling. The parallels to tobacco are not poetic, they are structural. In the 1950s, when the first serious studies linking cigarettes to lung cancer began appearing, the tobacco industry commissioned its own research designed not to find the truth but to manufacture doubt. They didn't need to prove cigarettes were safe. They just needed enough conflicting data in the public record to make the science feel unsettled, to make the average person shrug and say, well, nobody really knows, and to delay regulation by decades. In those decades, millions of people died of lung cancer while the industry's internal documents showed they knew exactly what their product was doing. The food industry learned from this. In 2016, when the New York Times reported on Coca-Cola's funding of a front group called the Global Energy Balance Network, whose central scientific message was that exercise mattered more than diet in addressing obesity, the documents showed the company had handpicked the researchers, shaped the messaging, and used the resulting science to deflect attention from the sugar content of its products. Coca-Cola's response when caught was to say it had always been transparent about its funding. Transparent. In the same year, an analysis of studies on sugary drinks found that studies funded by the beverage industry were 5 times more likely to find no link between sugar-sweetened beverages and obesity than independently funded studies. 5 times. That is not noise. That is a signal. And then there is the engineering. Because unlike tobacco, which was always at least honest enough to just be a cigarette, ultra-processed food has a unique weapon in its arsenal. Palatability engineering. The deliberate scientific manipulation of flavors, textures, and sensory experiences to produce what the industry calls the bliss point, the precise combination of sugar, salt, fat, and texture that maximizes craving and minimizes satiation. The goal is not to make food that satisfies you. The goal is to make food that makes you want more before the current experience has ended. Food scientists at major manufacturers have described this openly. Former insiders have written books about it. The internal research exists. These companies know exactly what they are doing when they design a chip that dissolves in your mouth quickly enough that your brain doesn't register the calories before you've eaten another handful. They know what they're doing when they add just enough sweetness to a processed food product that it crosses the threshold from food into craving, and this engineering is then wrapped in marketing that targets the people least equipped to resist it. Children, low-income communities, countries with less developed consumer protection frameworks. The global expansion strategy of ultra-processed food companies follows the same geographic pattern as tobacco's international expansion when domestic markets became regulated. As scrutiny increases in wealthier countries, growth targets shift to emerging markets. New consumers, new revenue, same product. And here is the part that should make you the angriest. Because while all of this has been happening, the bought science, the manufactured doubt, the palatability engineering, the targeted marketing, the public health conversation has been pointed almost entirely at you. Your choices, your discipline, your relationship with food. The $90 billion diet industry exists to sell you solutions to a problem that was manufactured by a $1 trillion industry that then funds the science telling governments it isn't their fault. You are simultaneously the victim of the most sophisticated food engineering ever developed, and the person being told you just need more willpower. A person living in a food desert surrounded by ultra-processed options because fresh food is expensive, inaccessible, or both, making choices shaped by decades of advertising that began targeting them in childhood, eating food specifically engineered to override satiety signals. That person is not making a free choice. They're operating inside a system that was designed, and the system was designed by people who knew exactly what it would do. None of this means you are powerless. It means the frame is wrong. Because treating the ultra-processed food epidemic as a personal responsibility problem is like treating the opioid crisis as a willpower problem. Technically true at the individual level. Completely useless as an explanation for why millions of people are sick in the same way at the same time, and wildly convenient for the companies that created the conditions. The tobacco industry spent 30 years telling people that smoking was a personal choice while hiding research showing nicotine was addictive and cigarettes were lethal. It took congressional hearings, class action lawsuits, a master's settlement agreement, and decades of regulation to partially unwind the damage, and cigarettes still kill hundreds of thousands of people every year. The ultra-processed food industry is roughly where the tobacco industry was in 1970. The science is accumulating, the internal documents are starting to surface, the researchers are getting louder, the industry is getting more defensive, and you're still eating their product for breakfast.